Even in our own environment, we have a Singapore office, a London office, a New York office. And I think it's super important to be respectful of each of those cultures and how people like to receive information. Some people like to ruminate over things, come back, versus speed and haste. And all of that is okay. It's just being aware more than anything else.
Welcome to The Profitable Table, fed by Woolco Foods, a podcast at the nexus of hospitality, business, culture, and the mind. Now here's your host, Woolco Foods CEO, Stephen Toberoff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Profitable Table, fed by Woolco Foods. I am your host, Stephen Toberoff, and today my guest is somebody that I'm very much looking forward to talking to, because when I first met my guest and had an opportunity to listen to his story, his career, it was fascinating on so many levels and really clicked with so many of the subjects that we explore in this podcast that I had to invite him on, and I'm delighted that he was gracious enough to accept my invitation. So without further ado, I want to introduce Barry Richards, who is the Group President of First Agency. Barry, thank you so much for coming in to speak with me today.
Stephen, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So there's a lot of questions I have regarding First Agency and just so many different aspects of your career. But if you wouldn't mind giving us a brief background of yourself and, your sort of experiences and how it is that you've come to First Agency and be where you are right now.
Yeah, I guess going back to college years, I undertook a hospitality degree. So my background and my passion certainly is embedded in hospitality. I left and became a chef, and rather than go straight into employment, I went abroad. I went to New Zealand, followed some friends with no real path other than to have a bit of fun for a few weeks. And I decided to stay there about 6 weeks, traveled to Australia to meet some family, and decided it was too good to be true. Hung out in Australia. I was using my chefing skills to earn some cash and move around and enjoy travel experiences around there. I then took in Japan, Indonesia, and at some point decided, probably about 18 months down the line, that I needed to get back into reality and to get into the working environment. So as we've talked about, I sort of went to first job that was available, which was an events business. I felt that it was an opportunity to remain in some kind of hospitality-based environment, but ultimately started up running events for pharmaceutical brands. So it was like a lot of B2B type work. A lot of that brought me to America. I was originally based back in the UK. From there, the company that I worked for got acquired fairly quickly by an American business, and we would get more involved in things like big automotive event, big brand work, lots of experiential type activity. Again, different types of travel around the world. So really loved the cultural side of that, working in different environments, different countries, nuances of doing so. And then ultimately that business got acquired. So again, day one, we had a transaction that completed with 4 simultaneous mergers in 1 year, and ultimately created a global meetings and events business. So that was towards the end of 2010. And then from there, an opportunity came up to come to New York. And it was a complete flip from a very comfortable global business to a complete startup. And came to New York just after 2008, when after the economic crash, and found an opportunity to create a niche business here locally in Manhattan, starting out in sourcing venues for, again, B2B, a lot of financial services companies as they started to come back. And then that grew ultimately to a point in 2014-15 where it was likely to be sold, which it ended up doing so. And then the real fly in the ointment, so to speak, was I went to Hong Kong for a job opportunity, came back through London, met the chairman of my existing business, then came back to New York, met the CEO, and we basically decided it was time to do something cool in the local market. First at the time was a very well-established company. There's about 100 people across 3 markets, and Singapore, London, and New York. And they were very well known for work in the private equity space and financial services. And then ultimately, over the last 8 or 9 years, as the story goes, we've gone from roughly 100 to 850 people. Our finances have grown clearly in the same trajectory. And we've become a very interesting, well-established brand, broader than the 3 markets that we were in originally. We've got employees around the world, working with some really interesting companies and brands. And that's how we came across ourselves.
You know, something about your story that I thought about when I first met you and that I'm thinking about even more as I'm listening to you is, and this I think will really resonate with some of our listeners, you know, what you had talked about, you've done a lot of traveling before you got to where you are now. And I wonder, Barry, in what ways do you think, I have not been a great traveler. I've done some traveling, but I'm always fascinated by people who have traveled and lived in all these different cultures. How do you think that experience has translated, if it has, into your decision-making skills as a business leader and just in business in general? Can you sort of identify certain attributes or benefits that have come from that experience? Because, and the reason I ask is because a lot of times people that want to get into business, if they don't think a little bit more expansively, they sometimes think, well, traveling or reading things that are outside of business or doing things that are not in the exact alignment with what they say you should do to advance in business is not constructive. And I don't really share that opinion. So in my mind, just listening to it, I'm thinking there must be so many different skills or experiences that one has being immersed in different cultures that impact how you handle decision-making as a business leader.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the range of experiences is important. So just by putting yourself out there, testing yourself and understanding what works in local markets. I mean, if I go to the Middle East, for example, some of those countries done a lot of work out there, run businesses, and you would never find a contract signed, for example. And if you say that to someone here locally, they're like, well, how on earth do you get the trust? Well, it's the only way business is done. A lot of that, I think, was, as I mentioned, being in New Zealand and Australia, whilst they're fairly common environments and consistent with what we're used to, just even putting yourself out there and trying things in a different way, there's a lot of failure involved in that, which I think is only a positive growth thing. Skills, adaptability, the ability to negotiate and understand different languages is important. I remember being we used to run a very large 10,000 people type event that went to Hong Kong. And I stood in front of 40 of the top hoteliers in Hong Kong. And I remember delivering a certain message that was basically that we don't commit to contracts. We basically reduce down the limits on the number of bedrooms we take due to the way that the event would run. And everybody stood in the room. It was general managers of these major hotel brands nodding, agreeing that they understood and everything else. As soon as we got out of the room and a week later and we tried to actually negotiate down, it was clear that the messages hadn't landed with any of them. And so there was some just interesting ways in which communication is received, how you interpret it. And I think it's made me a lot more calmer in my decision making. I'm pretty considered by nature. But I'd say the other side of the travel is the curiosity to learn. I just find it fascinating. I find it fascinating meeting people, and it just means it's how I kind of run from a business point of view.
That makes a lot of sense, because when you're traveling and you're immersed in new cultures, I would think you have to be somebody that can, as you say, calmly process information, acclimate yourself to the environment, be adaptable, be a good listener, be attentive to your environment, and then learn how to navigate within it, all of which are essential.
Yeah, all of that. And as you said that, Stephen, I was thinking respectful. So the other one I'm like massive is my mind went to a couple of trips to Japan when we were looking at setting up a business operation in Japan. Fascinating, because I think there's a general thinking that you can adopt and just move businesses to different environments and it would replicate, and it's just simply not true. But secondly was just once you broke down the initial understandable barriers of communication of various things, the party that we went to meet took us to their favorite sushi restaurant that was literally 10 seats. You would never know about this place in the middle of Tokyo. And it was their way of bringing you into their environment, making you feel comfortable, and then having a very sort of convivial conversation of what could happen. But for example, the different, as we were saying, the different cultures are a lot more open or closed, and it's how you sort of navigate that. Mm-hmm. So but it's not dissimilar, I'd say, even in our own environment. We have a Singapore office, a London office, a New York office, and I think it's super important to, again, be respectful of each of those cultures and how people like to receive information. Some people like to ruminate over things, come back, or versus speed and haste, and all of that is okay. It's just being aware, I think, more than anything else.
The other part of your story, before we jump forward a little bit more, that I was really interested in is, as you'd said, you had started in the hospitality space as a chef, and you moved around, and you've now landed in this place where you're group president of a very successful, huge organization. And yet you got there through a circuitous path. Where did you get the confidence to go through that circuitous path? Because, as again, just sort of dovetailing off what I said before, a lot of people that are listening, or even just in general, they think that they've got to do A, B, C, D, and they'll land at E. Whereas you took a very circuitous path, but I would imagine that takes a certain confidence or perspective on life, which I'd love to hear you speak a little bit more. And maybe it's not confidence, you'd characterize it differently, but I'd love to know what you think.
Chefing for me was just fascinating. You're in as you well know yourself, in that you're in a high-pressured environment. It's all about creativity, which is a very core value that I hold, and building things and growing things, making things, whatever that may be. And I think a lot of those principles are pretty much how I live my life with lots of things. And I'm always try to have an open mind and a bit of a growth mindset. I'm always looking at what's next, what can I do? And I've had to almost, in some ways, to be perfectly blunt, taper that a little bit as I've got older. But equally, I've not necessarily jumped around businesses, but I've jumped around roles, and my focus continually changed, and it keeps me very focused in a different way. It keeps me energized. It keeps me interested. And that's, it can be a trait or a flaw or whatever way you might look at it. But I think it's about, I do a lot based on how I feel. And if it feels right, I will go for it. And I'd rather not look back and just keep looking forward. And
wow.
It's served me well. So
I'm not surprised that it served you well, but I also would say in my experience that a lot of people understand what you're saying. Not a lot of people actually live that truth. And I really think that's cool. You hear about it all the time and you see it all the time. And I think that that's an important sort of concept for people to see realized in real time, which is what you're talking about, that by having the courage, because I do think it requires some courage, intuition, intelligence, whatever you want to say, to follow those feelings, leads you to a great place. And that intuition is not to be disregarded, but actually respected and listened to.
Well, I appreciate that. I think the other side is I try not to be all things to everyone. So I know where my strengths are, and I try and just continue to grow in that path. I'm also an avid learner. I'm constantly looking at whether it's the next podcast, the next article, the next completed a master's later in life, for example. And that was all about just continuing to learn and different ways to think about things, approach things, like you said. Comes from that sort of curious mind, I suppose.
Curious mind, and a phrase I've used before also, an expansive mind. And I really appreciate that in people, because that's one of the many sort of self-imposed barriers that I find people will impose on themselves, as I say, self-imposed, which is either limiting belief systems or even something as basic as an ossified sense of identity or personality, such as, this is who I am, and therefore I don't do that. If they were to take a step back and think about it, our personality and our identity is really something that we create. It's not immutable like our hand or our arm.
Yeah.
And so by having an expansive mindset, you really open up life to limitless possibilities, whereas if you decide to have limiting beliefs, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, again, a couple of phrases like the art of the possible, or if your goals aren't scary enough, they're not big enough, kind of thing. That's completely how it resonates with me. It's kind of like, well, why can't we do that? Why can't we achieve that? And yeah, you're going to get things wrong. That's okay. Be comfortable with that. Create a safe space for people to test things, try things. And ultimately, to me, that's massive growth potential. And that's what I've seen within businesses, within different roles, is you give people a license to have some freedom to try. And again, the art of the possible is unbounded.
I'm hearing a lot of things that I want to explore with you and from the comments you just made vis-a-vis business. But before I jump into that, I'd like for you to just share a little bit about what it is that you think about First Global that differentiates it, or what is it about First Global, and you can include your involvement or just sort of as it is, and then we'll probe into you, that you think is the unique value proposition about this business for people to understand it? Because I have some other questions, but I think this would be a helpful sort of foundational point.
Our success is built on our people. Many service businesses will say that, but ultimately the proof's in the pudding, and we've been able to attract some incredible talent to support the growth journey. We do a hell of a lot of work around maintaining our in-brand standards, as well as employee engagement, and ultimately the quality of our delivery and the events that we produce. There's a great pride amongst team members, and that comes through a lot of how we grow our business, which is has historically been a lot through referral. So happy clients moving to different brands, so it helps on the sales process. And we spend a hell of a lot of work making sure that we can maintain that.
I can really relate to what you said about referrals, because it's very similar in my business, where you have chefs and sous chefs and hoteliers move around. You want to make sure that you've delivered enormous value for them, so their first impulse is to bring you with them to their next place, because there's a lot of movement. But after what you just said, it brings me back to some of your earlier comments, because you were talking about the importance of not being afraid to fail, taking chances, all of that. How do you communicate those values to your team? Because what I try to do in my capacity here as CEO is to not only have great people, but to create a context wherein they can be as creative as possible and have as much ownership of their job as possible, because it instills them with that pride you were talking about. Now, you're delivering for massive corporations and massively sophisticated companies. How do you translate those values to your team and bring that out of them, so that that's part of your culture and part of what you deliver for your clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think having a clear North Star, having a clear direction, having some very tangible goals that people can aspire to, and then looking at that on an individualized basis, helping people understand how they are part of the collective, how they're helping drive the company forward, and ultimately the quality and the brand that they're delivering for customers. That certainly resonates.
So before we started this interview, we were talking a little bit about AI, and another similarity between your business and mine is or at least certainly for my business, and I think a big part of what you guys do, is live events, humans interacting. And when we'd spoken earlier in the month, you were sharing how the live events business and all of that has really taken off since COVID again, and I can relate to that as well. I just did a podcast last week about how, with the ubiquity of AI coming, that human events are going to become more valuable, more treasured, not less. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, in terms of what are your thoughts, and do you agree with me that there's been a certain enhanced appreciation for these person-to-person events that we didn't realize we cherish so much post-COVID? And do you agree with me that this trend of in-person events are going to continue? Or do you see, with your visibility into the business space, that no, there is a desire for maybe to pull back on that and have more remote? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with you. I think we're definitely seeing an uptick. We are seeing, it's interesting, when you take several customers, for example, that have gone through a bit of a downturn driven by economic conditions, they've actually superseded that by bringing more and more in-person events back together to ensure that they are getting that engagement. They're creating new culture as a business, things like that. I think in the future, there will continue to be a real desire and focus on live events. I think it will be quality over quantity, should I say. And we're certainly seeing that. I would say the industry as a whole, the events industry, the live events space, has been quite slow compared to other industries in terms of uptake on AI, in terms of products you might see through an event. And we're starting to see more experimentation in that. We've done a few things ourselves recently, and I think you'll see more and more of that versus how we actually deliver events on the operational side, which is obviously more around efficiencies and creating cost efficiencies or operational efficiencies on the back end. So I'm excited to see where it goes. I think if you think of the evolution of virtual events and how that kicked off, you've got the same thing going on within live events and how AI, but as well as many other digital technologies, can enhance communication and live activation.
One of the things that I find fascinating about your business is that on the one hand, there's the live event experiential aspect of it. On the other hand, you've got major clients that are looking to achieve either explicit or tacit things. They want to get things done in these. My question for you is, just because I'm curious, how do you balance, or how do your clients work with you in terms of determining how much they want you to focus on the creative component of the event versus executing on their vision of what they want to get out of the event? Is that a balancing act that occurs a lot, or is that something that, is it client dependent?
Yeah, I think it's probably the latter, to be honest. I think there's certainly some sectors that we work in that are quite rigid. There's a lot of regulation that determines what they communicate, how they do that, and it's quite restrictive. Then on the flip side, we work with some of the most experiential brands in the world as well. So there's much around ideation, creative development, content development, etc. that is a iterative, co-creative process. And that's a lot of what the team enjoys. I certainly enjoy that because it's about getting in and deep under the brand and really understanding what they're trying to achieve, like you said. So I think it's a balance. I think a lot of that is different by sector. We see a lot more diversity in the tech space, for example, than you would do in, say, private equity, but that's pretty obvious.
But that's so cool that you have, at First Global, you have this sort of business mission, if you will, that, business itself, I think, is an artistic endeavor. I've had conversations with people, and certainly in the space that we're in about hospitality and chefs, you can see it. But every business, I think, affords the decision makers, leaders, the opportunities to be creative. But what I really am intrigued by with what you're saying, because in addition to creativity, there's massive execution deliverables. And even execution itself can be an act of creativity. So your team is really multifaceted and bringing a lot of different talents to bear, which is very cool.
Yeah, and I think you pick up on a really cool point there, because I'm a great believer anyone can be creative in any role. Yeah. So we are a creative business by nature. So we had to do a bit of a cultural exercise internally a couple of years ago where it's just the team over there that are in the creative studio that are creative. And we were like, well, hold on a minute. In finance, you've just improved a process that's reduced time from 7 days to 1 day. Okay, how did you do that? Well, that was creative in the way that you thought about it. Or like you said, we've looked at different IT systems and integrated something in a different way that's improved user experience. Well, that's creative thinking. So it's one of our actual 5 core values as a company, and it's one that probably my favorite, if I'm being honest, because I just love, again, to hear, especially when we've got all these different generations in the market, in the business now. So many cool ideas rise up, and different ways in which we can continue to improve, especially if we embrace that. And there's so much cool stuff coming in from the younger generation that if they are embraced properly and given an opportunity to think about things, that can come up with stuff that we could sit in a room for a week and we'd never do it. So I think it's another open-minded one.
I love that. And I also couldn't agree with you more. One of the things that I have to really remind myself to do more often is to have those very purposeful conversations with members of my team here and elicit that creativity, that ownership in whatever the department is. And you see people's faces light up. It's something very innate and human. And I also agree with you that being closed-minded about saying, well, this generation is X, Y, Z in a negative, it's actually quite the opposite. They bring a fresh perspective that is extraordinarily valuable and important. And if you're not in tune with it or closed-minded to it.
So much, they're educated differently, they have different perspective on the world, almost without the baggage that many of us might be at a certain age. Mm-hmm. And I think the other one I was going to say, I've been involved in a mentoring scheme for about 7 years now, I think. So every year, and it's always around the sort of graduate age. And I love it because they're coming out with, it helps me challenge myself. And I use it as an opportunity to I'm there to learn from them as much as they are from me. And I think if you, again, embrace that and do it in an open-minded way, I think it's super cool. You can learn so much.
Well, 100%. And what you had said earlier about yourself, where you're always looking to enhance your learning, whether it was the additional masters or stuff, that's the other thing about business. See, so business can be so rich and multifaceted in ways if people open up, because there's never an end to new information. It's endlessly fascinating. And if you approach it as a learning experience, whether it's educating yourself on how can I improve my cash flow or how can I improve my branding, it doesn't matter. It's all fascinating. So you've got this rich and varied experience and a very sort of expansive way of looking at things. As a business leader, are there things that you sort of mindfully try to bring to your decisions or bring to your team? Or do you take the approach of really trying to be more of a listener first and tailor it to people? Because that's something that I have to try to balance with myself as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely the latter. I'm quite, I guess, cerebral by nature, so I will definitely listen, take it in. If there's an opportunity to add to the conversation or add to that, sure. I try to share experiences as a way for people to think maybe differently about something. That's definitely there. And I think it's, unless I'm very forthright about something, then it's definitely about building and co-creating. I'm all about collaboration. So it's a case of sort of, how are you trying to tackle that problem? Have you thought about it this way? Could you possibly go down that avenue? What about if you thought about several other ways? And probably my classic, which my colleagues would tell me, is I approach things, okay, that's great. Now let's get a blank sheet of paper. And if we didn't know all of this stuff, how would we think about it? I'd use that a lot because it's a great way of just parking any of the preconceptions you might have about trying to solve something. And actually it can generate such different ways of thinking about it and different solutions that actually you would never have even thought of if you hadn't had that sort of broader creative thinking or questioning of a challenge.
I really love that because, and I try to do it as well, because so much of what makes the difference between success and lack of success in anything in life is the thinking and the decision-making that is brought to any challenge or any opportunity. And when working in an environment with other people and people that you respect and that are talented, there's an enormous benefit to being a listener first and a facilitator more than a top-down. Like there are moments in time where I feel very confident and certain about something that has to be executed on. And normally it's a relatively small initiative, but important. But whenever it's possible, the more that I can get the initiative crafted, framed, and executed as a byproduct of people really thinking about it, collaborating, that's very powerful. And I think it differentiates from other companies that don't do that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's how you build momentum, isn't it? You get the team to come along on the journey. You get them to understand, to poke and prod and question. And ultimately, you're looking for them to be the holders of the solution and to drive that forward. So, and the more you can do that, the more they can disseminate that through teams and the organization.
So, knowing you a little bit, Barry, there's another part of your story that I really found very interesting, both on a personal level and also based on what I do, which is your food trucks. And I would love for you to know, I would love to learn more about that in terms of what got you into it, what they are, and then I have some other questions beyond that, but we'd just love to start with learning a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I guess I've always had a dream that I would have my own catering or hospitality business. Was never quite sure what it would look like. I've always had a passion for food. I brew beer. There's a variety of different things in the food or the food and beverage space that's always interested me. If I could try and brew coffee, I'd do it, or roast coffee beans, I'd do it, and different things like that. So that was the essence of where I was going. And then ultimately, my best friend in the UK has been in hospitality for 35 years, took a career break for about 2 months, went to Asia, came back with a few ideas about sort of influences in terms of the cuisine and food that he'd come into it. And we got together and were like, hold on a minute, what are you doing next? And he had no real direction at the time. And then we just thought, well, hold on, why don't we think about this? The opportunity arose, and then at a local sports club that we both spent youth at. And then we got a very close friend who's quite an eminent chef in the UK. So he started getting involved in some ideas and stuff. and a few other people. And before we knew it, sort of momentum took off over like literally 4 weeks. And we were like, right, let's go and do something. We've had enough. We've all got our day jobs. Let's do something on the side. And opportunity came up to purchase a pizza truck. So that was the first thing. And we thought, great, let's get this up and running. We created a company called Game Day Gourmet. So ultimately the idea being that we service all different types of sports events, a passion that we hold ourselves. We saw an opportunity in the market to do so. And the essence of that is all about great quality product, good hospitality experience, and flexibility in the type of events we can do. And we've not formally gone live yet. We're actually under a soft opening, but we've already had some pretty cool bookings come on board.
And this will be in the States?
It'll be in the UK to start.
Okay.
But we're looking across, basically, again, the world's our oyster. We're looking at how we might grow that. We've had a lot of interest already, so we're sort of looking at how that might develop. One other area that's been super keen for me was my master's was about opening a craft brewery in Connecticut. So the cross-pond combination. And as part of that process, I actually got involved with a number of breweries that were interested in doing collaboration work. And I hadn't even started it. So it's really something that's gathering pace, super excited, super interesting. And ultimately, it will be a sort of curated build process around the core ideas that we've talked about.
You know, from my background in the hospitality space, I think that food trucks are so cool on so many different levels because they give you so much optionality where, you know, you have food trucks that have a reputation for the best cuisine of whatever their niche is coming out of that food truck. Then, as you mentioned, people are able to leverage established brick and mortar brands and use their food truck to bring that brand to wherever you want it to. There's a good example in my town of a really great spot, a customer of ours called Mel's Butcher Box. Great. And she was actually a guest a while ago. Phenomenal hamburger place. She has a food truck, and when all the kids have their Sweet 16s or parties, they bring it. So I think food trucks are extraordinarily cool, and I think that they are the purest manifestation in many ways. Maybe not the purest, but they're an extraordinarily elemental manifestation of the hospitality space. So as you're doing this, again, just another example of the expansive mind. And I love that. It's like you've got this very big job at this very big company, and yet something interests you and you take action. And that's really an important point that I'd love for you to expand on, well, because it's not just having cool ideas, it's translating them into reality. Again, if you could, I mean, like, what's the thought process of you and your friends just sitting around and having this cool idea, and then in 4 weeks, it's a real thing? Is that just who you are? Or is that conscious? I don't know.
I'm passionate. Once I get passionate about something, I'm all in. I'm either all in or all out. And like I say, the day job first is an incredible business. It's going through further growth. I'm excited for the future. But this was something that gave me a slightly different direction, something to also get involved with a different group of people. My friend's more on the operational side. We call him he's the head pizza maker at the moment. And we're getting into experimenting with that, the type of flavors we want to use. And I've always had this thing, I guess, from the travel side of just picking up different vacation earlier this year in Belize, for example, met this most incredible coffee farm. And I thought, well, how could you integrate this into something, again, that might be bringing experiences to a place that allows other people to enjoy them, but also to support sustainability of businesses around the world as you travel. I think it's quite a neat kind of story there to build. So that's also been part of it. And Rich, my mate, has done a few other things himself as well. We just kind of were like, well, it's now or never. Let's get on with it. So it's been pretty rapid, but I think a lot of that is just the sheer passion and excitement we have for where we're going with this.
As I listen to your story, I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people, especially young people, almost in a romantic sense, because you've taken what is a very romantic and open-ended sort of life and approach to life, and at the same time translated it into really concrete and substantial success in the business world and in this other stuff. And I really want to get that message through to the big part of our audience that listening to you, Barry, if you approach things with courage and open-mindedness, but you actually take the action to translate it, you'll be surprised what you can create. And you can't limit yourself to the sort of formulaic view of things because that can be a disaster.
Yeah, I love that. 100%. Again, I come back to failure's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. You learn from them, you grow from them. And I'm hard on myself like anyone else is. But at the end of the day, I'm very much forward thinking and future thinking. That's just the way I am. I try to stay present as much as possible. But it's all about, if we do this, it could be that, the art of the possible type thing. And I guess it's just the way I am.
No, and I agree with you. Like, because for myself, like on the weekends or when I have downtime, one of my passions is I'll like to read philosophy or write reviews of different things and engage with different people in philosophy or literature. And some people say, well, what the heck does that have to do with being CEO of a company? And you could be doing this or that. And my thought on that is twofold. One, life is a big thing. And it's a gift and you want to enjoy it. Not everything is transactional. And two, at the same time, and I can tell you, and you will be able to relate to this because I see how you operate, the lessons that I've learned from that hobby, reading great literature, talking to people, philosophy, has helped me immensely in communication skills, listening skills, which are essential for business. So it's not good to be linear in your thinking, but the main thing is to execute. The main thing is to take that action, and you can only do it if you can not limit yourself by saying, well, I'm afraid I might fail, or what will people think, right? Just go for it.
Kind of my mind goes straight to sport. Growing up a lot as a kid, and like you're saying, your passions or interests outside of the day job or whatever else it may be, it's the golf, it's the cricket that you used to play where, if you don't take that shot, what are you going to do? Or if you don't take that risk with that, you might get out. Well, if I get out, I'm out anyway. If I hit the shot and I've scored some runs, or if baseball's the same thing, isn't it? It's like you've got to be 100% into something and then you get the benefits from it versus trying to, or being hesitant. I think a lot of sports performance coaches would tell you the same thing. It's you've got to be intentional. And once you do that, you've got more chances of making it than not.
Definitely. And I also think, and this is a lesson that some people never learn, but sometimes people learn it early, which I hope they do. You can't make decisions or not make decisions based upon how you think other people are going to view you. I see so often people that are concerned about how they're going to be perceived by people. And they don't even understand that those people, one, you don't know what they're thinking. Two, they're probably thinking almost certainly about themselves, not about you. And then three, you've got this whole elaborate story, which is just a self-defeating narrative. And the other thing that you said that got me thinking about this, or to sort of just to augment what you said, is that to be an effective leader, I think the more knowledge, the more diverse that knowledge, the more experiences you've had, the more multidimensional your thinking and listening skills can be, the greater your chance of making good decisions and being effective, the more limited, conformed. I just don't think that's the best way to be an effective leader for teams and people in general.
Yeah, I'd say, I guess my own philosophy would be, how can I help others help and maximize their own potential? That's simple as that. So if I can find a way to add or to provide some feedback or to give them some direction or whatever that may be, and let them then do whatever they choose to do from that, and you see people grow and flourish, I love that. That's the part of the job that I just find incredibly satisfying, because you're helping other people develop and grow. And I guess that's caring about others before myself in many ways, but that is how I am. And I think the more you can be open to that and share things and, like you say, not control things, it allows people to also probably have more trust and confidence in you as a leader. You're more authentic. And it's like I keep saying about sort of younger generations and stuff, and ways in which we've found ways to incorporate them in decision-making, in feeling part of, getting exposure to maybe a board. We've done some shadow boards previously as well, which I've found really super energizing, working with a group of, say, 20 to 25-year-olds on some projects, and just seeing how they approach things, seeing how they embrace listening, but also then use it to their own advantage. I think that's super cool.
I know that a lot of our audience, particularly the younger entrepreneurs, are going to be extremely inspired and motivated by our conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come in here and speak with me. I want to end the the conversation with one question, which is, and I know you've done this with mentors, what would you say would be sort of the one or two things that you would suggest somebody just coming out of high school or just coming out of college focus on? They know they want to do, just in general, because you went through such an amazing path and have had success all along the way, and there was an organic aspect to it. What would you say to somebody coming out of college or high school that's saying to themselves, I love life and I want to do things, but I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I know I have to do something. What advice would you give someone to how to approach that dynamic coming out of that situation?
Oh my word, Stephen, that's me 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like, and I remember my father at the time saying, just get out there and work.
Yeah.
Give it a shot. Try something. And I did. And I thought, you know what, there's no harm in just trying things and seeing what your path is. And I think looking back, your journey, like you said, your journey is not necessarily formulaic or linear, and with those experiences, I think brace opportunities have always been one to, if an opportunity comes on the table, I'm always looking at considering it versus just cutting it off straight away. And then from an entrepreneurial thing, I think something I've had to do as I've got older is just be calmer in seeing when you achieve things. I think you can get it can get overcomplicated and you can get quite wound up individually by trying to achieve things all too quickly. When the reality is, if you've got a good plan and you know where you're heading and you're trying things, it will probably organically, naturally happen anyway. And that's probably the biggest learning I've had personally from my own point of view, which I try to share with maybe some of the younger generation as they ask about tips and things like that.
It's phenomenal advice. Barry, I've really enjoyed our conversation and I find your story fascinating, and I'm glad I got an opportunity to learn more about it and explore it in this format. So I thank you for that.
Awesome.
And I want to just let the audience know that for those that have a question or want to reach out to Barry on anything that we discussed here, if you want to, share your thoughts with him, please reach out to him on his LinkedIn. As always, I love to hear from people. So email me at steven@woolcofoods.com, or you can reach out to me on my Instagram @woolcofoods. Barry, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. So cool. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you for listening to The Profitable Table, fed by Woolco Foods. Please be sure to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. And to learn more about Woolco Foods or Stephen Toberoff, please visit us at woolcofoods.net.